and welcome to the second episode of ByteSnap's podcast, Embedded Tech. I'm Nicola Cope from the editorial team at ByteSnap, and this week I'm sitting down with our director, Dunstan Power, to discuss electronic product development and how to navigate the 90% failure rate many new products face. So let's kick off with some questions. What are the most common reasons for the 90% failure rate in electronic product development, and how can companies mitigate these risks?
Lack of knowledge is probably the main thing, overarching. So people going into who don't know what is required. And then that lack of knowledge then causes errors to happen in the process, which then cause it to fail, if you see what I mean. So I think you've got really great knowledge of the whole process end to end. Lots of these issues won't happen. They can still happen, even if you know absolutely everything, and you're extremely expert, you can still obviously fail to get to market. But the difference is probably that you will sort of fail earlier and cheaper and quicker and effectively lose less. Um, so um, so yeah, if we look at, but yeah, so main things having that sort of lack of knowledge. So that means what are the areas then? So lack of knowledge might have lack of budget, so people can just not realize that. I mean, really to get any electronic product into the market in production costs at least six figures, like UK pounds. So I'm sure some people might find a few sort of counter examples to that. Um, but in general, people need to think in those sorts of terms that this is a six or seven figure endeavor to get a product actually production ready and in market. And in some ways, the sort of cheaper, higher volume you want it to be, almost the more expensive it is, because that engineering um, basically can make for more expensive development. So I talk about there being this sort of triangle of constraints when you're designing a product. So in one corner of the triangle, you've got the cost of the product itself. In the corner, you've got the development cost of the product. In the corner, you've got, say, the technical specification products, so exactly what it can do. And effectively, there's a sort of tug of war between all three. So obviously, if you have a lower technical spec, you can make it cheaper. If you have a lower technical spec, you can develop it faster. If you want it to be really cheap, that makes the development take longer because you've got to do more cost engineering. If you want the spec to be fantastic, it can make both the cost unit and the cost of the development more. So these things are sort of interplaying and pulling against each other. So where the cost to get into market is very low, it's probably at the expense of the technical spec and the BOM costs, because you're probably a lot of off-the-shelf components already, which might not be exactly fit for purpose, but allow you to get to market quicker. So one thing which isn't to do with electronic products themselves, but is actually the main reason startups fail, is they don't have customers. And it's like the most obvious thing, but uh,
We haven't done
they
the market research.
they produce a product that people just don't buy, and that's that there's lots and lots of reasons for that. Um, but we talk again in sort of in talks here about people falling in love with their own product. So this is where somebody has their idea in a shower for something that they think would really benefit society or themselves. It might be something that an area of market that they don't know anything about. Again, ignorance causing a problem. And they, what they should do is do a load of research as deeply as possible. Just talk, even if to start with, it's just talking to people, friends, people in the industry, they're looking at whatever internet research, and just check. And often that will, unfortunately, you have a great idea, and then you Google it and you find that someone else did the same thing 10 years ago. This is, and
Mhm.
you burst your bubble. It's not cost you anything. A little, it's a bit annoying, but that's the end of it. But unfortunately, some people don't do that research, and or not enough, or they do the basic research and think, oh, this is still feasible, but they go far too far along the development process because they basically fall in love with it and they don't really want to listen to naysayers.
Yeah.
Now, that isn't to say that naysayers are always right, because of course they're not, and sometimes you do have to push through despite naysayers. But that's obviously a judgment thing. But yeah, so we sort of encourage with product development people to get stuff tested as early as possible with customers. So typically you could do a proof of concept, which is using off the shelf components. Then you do a prototype, and then you gradually refine that towards production. And you can be testing this thing the market with your customers all the time. But one piece of advice was given to me years ago was that you should be able, and this applies to any industry, it's not just electronic products, but can you name your first customer, as name them by person? Um, Somebody will definitely buy this thing. Um, and it's surprising how often people can't. Just they become a bit hand wavy when you challenge them with that. And I think it's good practice to ask yourself that question. And if you can't answer it, then you got to be honest with yourself as to why that's it. There might be a good reason, but um, so yeah, I think, and then just as a slight aside on this whole thing of testing with customers and things, sometimes people don't do it because of secrecy and confidentiality. They're worried that if the world finds out about their amazing invention, it'll get stolen and they won't get to market. I think the reality is that's a tiny minority of cases where there's some amazing invention that with a patent. The reality is that most people, they're not going around the internet searching for other people's ideas to steal. And something else said to me was like, having an idea is 1 out of 10. You know, it's the other nine is the getting it to market and doing all this hard graft. And the fact is that if you steal somebody else's idea, you've still got to do the other 9 out of 10. So it's the sort
And
of
all the financial
secrecy.
investment as well, and
Oh,
everything that goes
well,
with
yeah,
it.
absolutely. Investment, marketing, product development, everything. So really, the secrecy is massively overrated. Basically, um, it's. I mean, obviously, for us as a consultancy, we sign NDAs and keep things confidential. But I think for, the actual product owner, the inventor, really needs to be going out and getting testing as much as possible. They might not want to market it for sale until they know that the thing works and they're ready. That's a different matter. This isn't about marketing so much as establishing that there is a market. And of course, markets with price can vary so that you can have a real cutoff where if the price of this thing is £50, there's a huge market. If the price is £70, there isn't.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, that would be something I'd be very, something as price sensitive that I'd be very wary of. But, you know, whereas there's other products where it doesn't really matter how much it costs, the
Yeah,
volumes are low, and the fact is your product is solving an issue,
yeah.
and that means that people will just pay whatever's required.
So moving on, how crucial is market research in the early stages of product development? And what methods do you recommend for validating the product ideas? So how are they going to go about that?
So market research, so this is about startups fail because, or products fail because they don't have customers. The reason they don't have customers is because they're not solving a problem. So the first thing is start with the problem. What is the problem your product is solving? And if it isn't solving a problem, then and there are again a subset of products that don't solve a problem that still do very, very well. But just ask yourself, what is the problem it's solving? And then once you've really identified what the problem definition is, you can look at, well, how else do people solve that problem? Because the world's turning, everyone's getting life that, you know, there aren't that many problems that are sort of life or death. You know, what's happening at the moment? Well, it could be that people are just putting up with something that's really annoying. Or it could be that, like say, it's a health thing where people are sort of dying 10 years earlier than your product will extend life 10 years. But, you know, you just have to get to the bottom of, yes, this definitely is a problem. And then you have to sort of look at what is the cost of solving that problem at the moment. Because that gives, you know, what's the alternative, the next best alternative to your product. And there always is an alternative because otherwise, as life goes on. So um, that allows you to work out what the likely sale cost might be, you know, how easy it is to market the cost of it. So as an aside, yeah, so you're talking about market research. Yeah. So so your market research, I guess, consists of informal to start with, just industry events, talking to people. I mean, firstly, companies that set up within businesses they know about sectors they know about do far better than people who try and set up in random sectors. So that's the first thing. So, but so if you're in a sector that you know about, then talk to people you know and just sound them out, and that's the starting. And then the next thing would be, and that's almost sort of free for you to do. You can sometimes it helps to have an impartial voice to avoid this sort of falling in love with your own products. Like as a company, we've twice hired a market research company to go out and do the research for us. And actually, the first time we did this, they came back and said, "Nah, do it." And they were right. They were absolutely right. But we didn't want to hear that because
Yeah.
we put time in. We'd sort of but it was good to get an impartial person because they're not asking leading questions. They're not, that and at the end they have to tell you something you don't want to hear. But hey, it saved us, it's just a lot of money and time because we didn't go into that thing. And then events that happened since have very much shown that that was absolutely the right decision. The second time we did it was on the Versanetic products, and then they came back and said, yeah, there is a market, and they were right. And, and that was a lot more successful.
So let's go to the next question. What role does timing play in product success? And how can companies ensure they're not too early or too late to the market?
It's an example of this. We had a customer who launched it was what you might call a sub-meter, which was it was a wireless device you could plug appliances into and would measure how much energy the appliance took, and then you could connect via Bluetooth. And they did this in 2006, actually, the first predates ByteSnap when I first met the guy. The problem he had was that at the time, no one really understood why anyone would want to measure the power of an individual appliance or piece of equipment. He won an award from Shell quite on a sort of eco competition, but he was effectively trying to explain to people about the value of sort of energy conservation, effectively, things that a lot of the things he had to explain, he just absolutely wouldn't have had to explain even like 8 years, 9 years later, let alone now, because it was an IoT device, which before the IoT was really called the IoT, it was, and it was sort of energy saving and all the rest of it. So yeah, I'd say he launched too early. there's other there's obviously other examples of people launching too early. So the iPod, like everyone knows, digital audio, digital music player, which of course now pretty much redundant because of smartphones. But again, but of course the iPod was hugely successful, but in no way was it the first digital audio music thing. There were a bunch of devices before. But again, they were at a time when people using, when they're overlapping with Walkman, Sony Walkman, things like that. They just didn't have the marketing clout, and people just didn't get what the point was. And Apple managed to break through all of that with a really good product, and good marketing, but it wasn't an original in any way original. It was just a really nice packaging of of an existing idea. Um, then the too late to market would be, I would say, somebody who decided they wanted to a sell home chargers now, EV chargers, because effectively the market got created, lots of people flooded, and a lot of the late comers had no distinct unique selling point at all. And it's just as the market matures, it becomes increasingly difficult to break in. You need more and more of a compelling pitch and all sorts of selling to get into the market. That isn't to say that there aren't plenty of opportunities in EV charging generally, just because there's such infrastructure that needs to go in. But certain parts of that sector have just been sort of hollowed out. So yeah, so timing's difficult because um but I'd say the key is if you have to create the market, very few companies will create a market. And we talk about technology push and demand pull. If you're having to, like this guy, this chap who had the smart meter, he was having to explain to people what the purpose of it was, why it needed to exist, rather than just trying to say people getting all of that and going, oh right, so why is your product better than other products, or why do I need a particular product? So only very large companies like Apple and Microsoft and people can really invest in creating a market, and even then they sometimes spectacularly fail. Microsoft has had quite a few, and Google, with Google Glass, for instance, you get these very high profile failures of people trying to create a market.
The
But
Dyson
they've got,
Air mask as well, I guess they did that,
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
they? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But they've got the money to be able to move on and live another day. If small business, it could bankrupt you. So yeah, I'd say, for bearing in mind that most people reading listeners will be SMEs, avoid things where you have to create a market. It's just too expensive and difficult. Um, you want to being too late is a case of really that comes down to understanding the market, knowing what the competition is. And there are some rules that I've read in like business books about looking at this slice of the market and about. So this is one, Nicola, where there's. I read some books where they actually put a bit more numbers on it, where they
Uh-huh.
say like if you've got three incumbent, if anyone owns more than X amount of the market, like 50%, avoid it and stuff like that. I'm trying
Okay.
to think which it would be in one of the books that I've got, probably Lean Startup or something. But yeah, there are metrics. There are metrics in books about going to more specifics about what percentage, if the market is owned by incumbents. So going into a fragmented market, um, um, yeah, if you get a fragmented market, that's a lot better. But if you go into a market that's owned by an incumbent, that's very difficult,
To break
to
in.
break, because you've got to have something that's way better than their
Yeah.
product and not get crushed by them.
What strategies can companies employ to secure funding throughout the development process, especially when faced with unexpected challenges?
So there was an adage. It was in the a South American handbook um, that I read when I was sort of 20 and went backpacking around South America. The last piece of advice it gave. It said, after you've packed everything, you're ready to go. It said, take twice the money and half the clothes.
Ah,
And
yeah,
and it's such a good piece of advice and true, as many a backpacker will know how everything's a little bit more expensive than they'd budgeted, and but they also have far too many clothes, than the
yeah.
bags twice as heavy they want. And I think the sort of analogy of that in business is that you need to raise more. You need to have more money than you need a contingency in
Mhm.
product design. Things will go wrong throughout it just happens, uh, and if you could say at the start what was going to go wrong, you can do a risk register, all the rest of it, and that's a separate thing, and that can definitely help you cut it up. But even if you've done a fantastic risk analysis, there's still going to be stuff that happens outside of your control. So um, the first thing to say is, you need to work out how much money you need, and then you need a decent contingency on top of that. In terms of like how you raise money, there's actually lots of other blogs and stuff and all the rest of it about, but the typical ways are early on. It's it could be sort of grant funding. We're talking about startups here, and of course, as ByteSnap, a lot of our customers aren't startups, but they still have the same, you know,
The still
they're
same
still
thing. Yeah.
well. Most of this applies regardless of your startup or your big business. You're launching a new product, and you will be financially constrained. Many big businesses that would just give somebody a blank check to go and develop a product. I mean, we find that big businesses can be every bit as constrained. They'll get told you've got this budget, and then if they go a pound over it, they're then coming to us saying, "Oh, we haven't got any money," and it's like these are like multi-million pound business,
So,
100 million pound businesses, but they're still saying they very constrained budget, because that's the way big businesses, probably the richest businesses, are the ones in the middle, the sort of uh the um the the um SMEs type size, where they can so
your
yeah, I mean,
advice is get the money, more money than you need at the beginning, rather than securing the funding during the development process. That would probably
well,
be
I
your
mean,
advice.
right, I'm just saying throughout it, basically the cost of development, cost of failure, gets bigger and bigger as you go along. So the earlier you can fail, the better. If you're going to fail, you don't want to fail later. Um, and you get money by proving to people that you're solving it, that you've got a market and you can do the maths. And to do that, I'd say engineers love to get stuck in um, and build stuff. I mean, I just given a 2,314 piece R2D Lego set
Yeah.
for my birthday, which I've been building with my son. And this is what, as an engineer, what you love. You just get the instructions, get digging, you're building, and it's great fun. And that's fine for a toy, that's fine for Lego. So, but leave that at home with your Lego set. With a
Yeah.
business, yeah, really, the more paper stuff you can do, the better. Don't immediately start writing software and building stuff. First thing, if you're doing it for fun, that's fine. But if this is a serious project supposed to make money, do your research, do as much as possible before you go anywhere near a key, designing anything. And this is difficult for engineers, because engineers like to get stuck in, and they then fall down this slippery slope, falling in love with their product, over engineering it. All the thing, ending up with a product which is great, but no, it doesn't solve a problem, or it does solve a problem, but it's far too expensive, or all those sort of issues. So the first thing is, at the outset, do the research as much as possible at the start. Talk to people, make sure you're doing the right product, use that to generate get funding. You can there are grants and things available, they come with lots of strings attached. then, but the advantage of grant funding is at least you've third parties. You've had to convince some third parties, impartial people, that you've got something worth doing. That in itself, we've won grants in the past and also failed to win grants, but the process of applying for them does make you have to do a lot of this real market research and justification and number and all the rest of it. And so while it's quite a painful process, again, if you go through it, you might actually find that applying for it, going through it, actually, I don't know what the market is. I don't know how much this should be. I don't know who's going to buy it and all those things. And actually getting a grant could actually, again, because the grants will only ever cover a very small percentage of the overall development, it could actually save you more money of your own money because you'll realize actually this is a dud.
Okay, so this probably ties back to what you said, but do you recommend any ideas for validating your products?
A grant application, yeah, if you think of it as a validation method, not just as a way of raising money. I mean, you see grants given to products that are terrible and are unsuccessful and don't go anywhere. So it's by no means the acid test, because a lot of the people in the grants out don't know the market, but I think the main thing is that it's that discipline that you have of going through yourself to justify it is a good.
Great. So moving on, how important is building the right team for product success? And what key roles or skills should companies prioritize?
So everyone's got, the entrepreneur or the lead will have skills, and they will also in some areas for sure, but they'll be skills in other areas. And I think the first thing is, to do a skills matrix and just say, like, what can I and can't do, be honest with yourself. And then basically you need to form a team fundamentally to fill in those other skills you're missing. Some of the skills you're going to need throughout the entire project and maybe into production and for the rest of the lifetime of the product. They're the ones that you might want to be looking at permanent members of staff for, or collaborators. Other skills are very transitory. You need somebody, say, to build a phone app as part of the product. You don't need a person necessarily to be part of the long-term team. That sort of thing you can outsource. So, so firstly, it's identify what's missing, and then look at which ones are transitory, which are long term, and then hire accordingly. So outsource short-term stuff. Very long-term, stuff needs to be permanent. You might have bits in between, depending on your financial situation or whatever bit, you might have stuff in between where you want to sort of contract staff or get people in as part of an equity situation if it's a startup. But yeah.
Moving on, what are some of the common pitfalls in the transition from prototype to mass production, and how can they be avoided?
Thing is, people underestimate the difference between prototype and mass production, and particularly proof of concept to mass production. So we get customers turning up with bags of bits saying, "Oh yeah, we've done 80% of the work," and in reality, they've done probably 10 or 20% work. So what you typically do between prototyping, so prototypes can be very close. It's very case by specific. So prototypes, like when we design prototypes from the outset, we design them to go into mass production, unless we're specifically told by a customer not to. Occasionally happens because they just want something out very, very quickly to show people, and they don't care. But I think so. But some people don't do that. They really just want something very quick that show people to raise money, which is absolutely fine. But that's more we would call a proof of concept rather than a prototype. So I think that's the difference. So a proof of concept is something which just shows that you can solve a, say, problem with a piece of technology, it will basically work, and it ignores the actual realities of production. So it won't be cost engineered. That goes out the window.
Mhm.
Typically, the battery life might be an hour, and you need it to be a year. Um, might weigh twice as much. It might be twice as big. It doesn't matter. That's all fine. But the great thing about proof of concept is all about showing it is actually possible to technically solve this problem.
Mhm.
And you can use a proof of concept to get, you know, financial backing for your project. The
Yeah.
issue people have is they then think the default mass production is quite small, whereas actually proof of concepts are typically quite there's an early stage, um, because sort of cost engineering things in particular to get the product to be affordable to meet a market demand. That's can be very challenging,
Mhm.
depending on the market. And so for a consumer market, um, it's typically things are very sensitive, and you might have to do quite a lot of iterations of the design to optimize all the parts to make it affordable. For a sort of B2B products, sort of low volume, more industrial, it might not be particularly price sensitive, and actually, so the jump off from proof of concept to production is lower.
Mhm.
Um, but as I said, there's other things like power management. Like, so if something's battery powered, that's a typical one where people ignore that on a proof of concept.
Mhm.
Um, but then say, oh, actually, I want it to last 2 weeks, and actually using a cellular technology in it, and it lasts a day.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, actually getting from to a that could be a major piece of design work.
Mhm.
It may not even be technically feasible. So, um, yeah, I'd say the main mistake people make is just underestimating how much there is. Another thing is like designing for production tests and for mass production. So you can design a board which is it can be built, but the test time takes 10 minutes per board, and that time is money in a factory. So
Mhm.
um, that sort of designing something from the outset that test you can test a high degree of testability. So you're testing most of the functions
Mhm.
quickly. That's the ideal thing, is you test like 100% of the board
Yeah.
really fast. Reality is it's often very difficult to test 100%. Um, but you might get to 85%, um, and then to get that test time right down. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'd say that's the other thing. So uh
So the
yeah,
main thing is
power cost, factory
mhm.
test. Oh yeah, compliance testing. I haven't talked about that. So obviously every product needs to go through some form of compliance testing. Um, Even the most basic electronic products will need EMC testing. Um, Again, most customers understand that it's required. Um, but again, it's underestimated how much is required. And so for say something like ATEX, which is about industrial explosion proof devices, let alone medical. I mean, medicals, it's you're getting into potentially years of testing. So yeah, I think as part of your initial um, appraisal of the product and going to market, find out what appliance compliance testing you'll have to do, and um, how long it will take and how much it'll cost in an approximate way. You're not probably going to do exactly, but that will help you with your finances and sort.
And the final question, what metrics should companies use to measure success at the different stages of product development? So how can you know if you're being successful in your product development?
I think if you plan the product developments at the outset about and have gates, so a lot of companies they have the formal gates to say we're going to do a uh, proof of concept, um, and by this and we're going to spend this amount of money, and then we're going to, so if you got planning, you set yourself your own little targets, and you can measure yourself against those targets. That's a good way of measuring success, really. And as I said, getting closer to knowing you've got customers and that people are going to, buy the product as you go along. So, continually um, testing your ideas, your prototypes with your market as you go along, rather than just doing it all in secret and then going, "Hello, everyone, I've got this," and then it falling flat on your face, you know.
Thank you, Dunstan, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Embedded Tech. For more information on how we can help with your product redesign, visit ByteSnap.com.